Good evening, dear students. Welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 31st July 2025, and today we have some very important topics for the discussion. So one by one, we'll try to discuss all these topics in a very detailed and in-depth manner. So before going into this discussion, so please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. So the first topic with which we're going to start the session is about the recent earthquake that has been seen in Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia as well as Japan. And in fact, this is one of the massive earthquake. And in fact, this massive earthquake of 8.8 magnitude is associated with the Pacific Ring of Fire. So therefore, let's understand about the Kamchatka earthquake in a much more detailed manner. So what does an earthquake of 8.8 magnitude actually means? And what actually triggered this earthquake? So what were the earthquakes that were seen at this particular region previously? So we'll be understanding this in a very detailed manner. And remember that this will be important for your prelims examination and for mains examination also, for Gender Studies paper 1 in Geography and Gender Studies paper 3 Disaster Management. This could be very important. So we all knew that recently a powerful 8.8 magnitude earthquake, so that has struck off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. So remember that this Kamchatka Peninsula belongs to Russia, so which is located far east of Russia. The Kamchatka Peninsula is located far east to Russia, close to Japan. And this powerful 8.8 magnitude earthquake led to a widespread tsunami warnings across the Pacific Ocean. And in fact, this earthquake has centered 119 kilometers southeast of Petropavlovsk and Kamchatsky at a shallow depth of 19.3 kilometers. However, initially this earthquake has been reported 8.0 of magnitude, but later it has been upgraded to 8.8 magnitude earthquake. However, this 8.8 magnitude earthquake is followed by strong 6.9 aftershocks as well. And this marks the strongest global quake since Japan's devastating 9.0 magnitude earthquake in March 2011. And this has triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And in fact, the 9.0 magnitude earthquake in Japan in March 2011 also led to the tsunami, and this has triggered Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan, right? So therefore, this Kamchatka quake is one of the biggest earthquakes after Japan's earthquake in 2011, right? So the context is clear for you. Now let's understand earthquake magnitude and how an earthquake magnitude is being measured. Now on this image you can clearly see this is the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia's far east, and in fact the northern part of this Kamchatka Peninsula is Bering Sea, and on south Sea of Okhotsk is located, right? So I hope it is clear for you. On the eastern side of this Kamchatka Peninsula is the Pacific Ocean, on north Bering Sea, south Sea of Okhotsk, and on the east it is the Pacific Ocean. So let's understand the earthquake magnitude and how it is being measured. Now previously I have told you that this Kamchatka earthquake is 8.8 magnitude earthquake, and in fact the 8.8 magnitude earthquake is classified as a great earthquake. So it is being classified as a great earthquake because of its magnitude. And in fact, an earthquake of such magnitude is a rare event, right? So because of this reason, it is considered as a great earthquake in the earth. However, according to US Geological Survey, so earthquake of this scale, which is 8.8 magnitude, so it actually releases a huge amount of energy or immense amount of energy. And in fact, the amount of energy that such a high magnitude earthquake release, this is corresponding to around 31.6 times more seismic energy, right? So therefore, for instance, the Kamchatka earthquake released around 30 times more energy than the Myanmar's 7.7 magnitude earthquake in March 2024. We all knew that Myanmar experienced an earthquake of 7.7 magnitude in 2024. However, this Kamchatka earthquake has released an energy 30 times more energy released during the Myanmar earthquake in 2024, so that you can understand the intensity of this earthquake at Kamchatka Peninsula. However, what does magnitude actually means, right? So what exactly magnitude refers to? Now, magnitude is the amount of energy which is being released by an earthquake, an amount of energy which is released by an earthquake, and the intensity of such an earthquake, right? So the intensity of such an earthquake at that particular location, right, which is called as the magnitude. However, the earthquake movements are being recorded through the seismograph. Seismograph is being used for recording the earthquake movements. And in fact, seismograph actually tracks the relative motion between Earth's surface as well as suspended mass to determine the overall seismic activity. So this is what the seismograph usually do, right? So Richter scale is also being used, right? So Richter scale is also being used to find out the intensity of an earthquake. Now, if you carefully look at this Kamchatka Peninsula, right, so on this map you can see that this is the Kamchatka Peninsula. On the north of this peninsula is Bering Sea, and south of the Kamchatka Peninsula is Sea of Okhotsk, and in fact on the eastern side it is the Pacific Ocean, right? So this is what is called as the Kamchatka Peninsula, and the Kamchatka Peninsula is located in the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is a volcanically active zone or seismologically active zone, which is located on the plate boundaries, right? Because of this reason, world's most earthquakes, volcanic eruptions takes place around the Pacific Ring of Fire. So we'll also understand around the Pacific Ring of Fire, but just look at this Kamchatka Peninsula. Now the Kamchatka is a high risk seismic zone because it is located along the Ring of Fire. So you can see here, so this is the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is seismically very active. World's highest number of earthquakes are actually takes place in this Pacific Ring of Fires. Volcanic eruptions also takes place at this Pacific Ring of Fire. Now here the Kamchatka Peninsula is located, right? So therefore the Kamchatka Peninsula is located in the Pacific Ring of Fire. So in fact, the Kamchatka Peninsula is located in Russia's Far East, and in fact it is world's most earthquake prone regions. One of the world's most earthquake prone regions, this Kamchatka Peninsula. And in fact, the Kamchatka Peninsula is 1250 kilometers of landmass. This is 1250 kilometers of landmass, and in fact the Kamchatka Peninsula has also witnessed several powerful earthquakes in the past history as well. So in the year 2020, 2006, 1959, 1952, 1923, in all these years, this particular peninsula already experienced earthquakes followed by the tsunami events as well. And in the year 2025 also, there is a powerful 8.8 magnitude earthquake followed by a tsunami at this Kamchatka Peninsula, which is located Russia's far east region. Now, what actually triggers the frequent earthquakes? Now, in fact, the tectonic plate movements actually trigger the frequent earthquakes at this Kamchatka Peninsula in particular, and Pacific Ring of Fire in general. For example, in Japan, you very often see a lot of earthquakes, major earthquakes, minor earthquakes. So this is all because of the tectonic plate movements. And in fact, this region that I have highlighted, this region is also seismically very active, right? So seismically very active as well. And this is active because of the subduction of the Pacific plate beneath the Okhotsk microplate, right? For example, imagine that this is one plate, and this plate is called as the Okhotsk minor plate. Okhotsk minor plate. However, beneath this Okhotsk minor plate, the Pacific plate is going through the subduction, right? So subduction of the Pacific plate underneath this Okhotsk minor plate is the major cause of this 8.8 magnitude massive earthquake at this Kamchatka Peninsula. Now, what is a subduction? So let's understand what exactly is a subduction. Right? For example, this is the Pacific plate and this is Okhotsk plate and Pacific plate. Now, subduction is actually a geological process where the denser tectonic plate slides beneath. For example, this Pacific plate is a denser tectonic plate. It has a higher density, and this denser tectonic plate slides beneath a lighter one. Now here Okhotsk microplate is a lighter one, but Pacific plate is a denser one. Now the Pacific plate slides below the a less denser or lighter plate. So thereby it has been causing stress at these boundaries. The stress at these boundaries majorly causes the earthquake, right? So one example is Himalayas. So Himalayas are known as the youngest folding mountains, and Himalayas are formed because of the Indian plate colliding with the Eurasian plate. Now here also Indian plate is denser and it is going beneath the Eurasian plate, and that's how Himalayas are being formed, right? So in fact, when the denser plate is going beneath the lighter plate, the stress will be released, and this stress actually causes the earthquakes, right? So Himalayas are also seismically very active. So major earthquakes also takes place in Himalayas. So this is because of the movement of the Indian plate into the Eurasian plate. So here the Pacific plate, which is denser, going beneath the Okhotsk microplate, which is lighter, and that causes this 8.8 magnitude earthquake at Kamchatka Peninsula far off Russia. So in fact, as I have already explained, that Himalayas were formed by the Indian plate pushing underneath the Eurasian plate through the subduction, thereby making the region highly earthquake prone, right? So therefore this region is highly prone to the regular earthquakes, this Himalayan region. Now let's understand the Pacific Ring of Fire. Now, what exactly is a Pacific Ring of Fire? And in fact, this Kamchatka Peninsula is also part of the Pacific Ring of Fire. So this Pacific Ring of Fire is actually a horse-shaped belt of intense seismic and volcanic activity, right? So intense seismic plus volcanic activity. So this is the belt which is located in the Pacific Ocean, and in this belt there is an intense seismic as well as volcanic activity. And in fact, this circles around the Pacific Ocean, which is called as the Pacific Ring of Fire. So this is the first thing. Secondly, the Pacific Ring of Fire stretches over around 40,000 kilometers. And in fact, this Pacific Ring of Fire have multiple tectonic plates. It has multiple tectonic plates, right? So the multiple tectonic plates including the Eurasian plate, North American plate, Indian plate, Australian plate, and other important plates. And because of this reason, there is a intense seismic and volcanic activity all along the Pacific Ring of Fire, right? So there are number of plate boundaries, and the number of plate boundaries, they move, they regularly move against each other, towards each other, right? So they form the transform plate boundaries with each other. So divergent plate boundaries, and they even form the convergent plate boundaries. So because of all the geological activity, earthquakes are very common here at the Pacific Ring of Fire. And in fact, the Pacific Ring of Fire also span across around 15 countries, and some important countries including Japan, Russia, Indonesia, US, Chile, and Philippines, right? So it spans around 15 countries, and all of which frequently experience earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, right? Because of the tectonic movement of the plates which are located in the Pacific Ocean or the Pacific Ring of Fire. So I hope you have understood. Now the tectonic forces. So what are the tectonic forces behind the Ring of Fire? So as we have understood that the Pacific Ring of Fire is a zone which experiences intense seismic and volcanic activity, right? So this is because of the movement of tectonic plates, constant movement of tectonic plates, because in this zone there are a number of different tectonic plates are found. For example, Indian plate, Eurasian plate, North American plate, Australian plate. So because of the movement of the tectonic plates, this region experiences intense seismic and volcanic activity. So firstly. Secondly, these plates frequently slide past, right? So they can slide past each other. So they even collide with each other, and they even subduct underneath each other. So these things actually causes the earthquakes. They are also causing the volcanic eruptions, right? So therefore the frequent movement of these plates have been causing regular high intensity massive earthquakes all along the Pacific Ring of Fire area. And in fact, when the rough plate edges, for example, so here we have understood that this is Okhotsk plate, which is the lighter minor plate. However, a Pacific plate which is a denser plate, and this Pacific plate has been going beneath the lighter plate. Now when it has been going beneath this lighter plate, now plate edges sometimes stuck while the rest of the plate continues moving. For example, this area remains stuck, but the rest of the plate moves forward, right? So over a period of time, at this part, the stress started building up. So suddenly, because of extensive force, this stress is released suddenly, and that would cause a catastrophic earthquake. And this is what happened with recent Kamchatka earthquake and the tsunami, right? So I hope you have understood this, and this is very, very important for the prelims and mains examination as well. And next important topic is that let's understand the context. The context is that now we wanted to become a developed country, which is also called as Vikasit Bharat, the famous Vikasit Bharat by the year 2047, right? A developed country by the year 2047. So even though we have a vision of becoming a developed country by the year 2047, but Indian economy requires a structural transformation. Indian economy need a structural transformation to become the developed country or a Vikasit Bharat by the year 2047, right? So therefore, in this particular topic, we'll be discussing what does the structural transformation actually means for India. So what are the areas that India should really focus on to achieve this structural transformation, and that will help India become a developed country by the year 2047. So let's try to understand this. Now the context is that recently we have seen some developments with respect to India. Now what are those developments? So for example, China has imposed certain restrictions on export of rare earth metals to India. Now export of rare earth metals, rare earth elements to India, so because of this, it badly hit our domestic industry firstly, and secondly, China also withdrawn some Western chip makers from China, right? And the withdrawal of Western chip makers from China have reignited debate about India's economic direction. So what is India's economic direction? And over dependence on trade-led growth. So we should not depend on trade-led growth alone if we wanted to achieve higher levels of growth rate, and that will help achieve the aim of becoming a Vikasit Bharat or developed country by the year 2047. So therefore, let's understand. So what is India's development trajectory? So how it should look, and how we can diversify our development strategy. So we should not just focus on trade-led growth, rather we need to diversify our economy. There is a need to achieve a transformation, right? So it is being said that India's current growth model, it mainly depends on exports. It mainly depends on exports, specifically in services, not even the manufacturing goods. For example, if India depended on exports, particularly on manufactured goods, so that will be good for Indian economy, because it can create employment opportunities. It can create employment opportunities for India's youth, and it can strengthen India's domestic manufacturing, and it can help earn forex. And we can substantially reduce our dependence on other countries. We can substantially reduce our imports as well. So therefore, it will help achieve the goal of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is the self-reliant India. Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is self-reliant India, and we can also achieve the goal of Make in India program, right? So therefore, depending on exports is good, but the problem is we have been excessively dependent on export of services rather than the manufactured goods. So therefore, we should also focus on the export of the manufacturing goods as well. So in order to export the manufactured goods, we should focus on the industry, right? So reforms, industrial reforms is very important. However, if you look at the global trade, particularly post 2010, the global trade post 2010, so there is a rise in protectionism. There is a substantial increase in the protectionism all around the world. Now, what exactly is protectionism? Protectionism is against the globalization. Against the globalization. For example, America First policy. America First policy. And closing doors for the external trade, the bilateral trade, multilateral trade. So because of the rise of protectionism, the WTO weakening further, right? So this is a global trade body. It has been weakening because of rise of protectionism, right? So we have been witnessing rising protectionism, technological fragmentation, and strategic decoupling also taking place. And in fact, we have also been observing the global tensions. For example, US-China rivalry. US-China rivalry, particularly the trade war between US and China. And this US-China rivalry has exposed the fragility of the trade-centric development model. So therefore, we should not just depend on the trade-centric development model. However, India's integration to the global value chains may remain a constraint factor due to the geopolitics and structural limitation that India has been facing. Right, so as of now, we have been facing a lot of structural limitations and the geopolitical constraints as well, and that has been limiting India's integration into the global value chains. And it is very, very important for India to integrate itself into the global value chains in order to diversify the growth trajectory, the growth models of India. However, here the problem is, unlike China and East Asian economies, right? So East Asian economies are being called as Asian tigers because of their growth rate that they have achieved because of the manufacturing. But India has been struggling to build a strong industrial base. Now, in the beginning, I have emphasized that we should have a strong industrial base. China and East Asian economies have built a strong industrial base, but India failed to build a strong industrial base, because strong industrial base can create gainful employment opportunities, right? So we have a huge demographic dividend, right? So we have a huge demographic dividend, but here the problem is that the workforce lacked skills, firstly. Secondly, the workforce in India is mostly dependent on the agricultural sector, because we don't have the industrial base that can actually create or can absorb workforce from the agriculture sector. And the service sector, which has been contributing around 45% of India's GDP, is not a labor intensive. It is both capital intensive as well as the technology intensive, but it is not labor intensive. But here, industry is a labor intensive sector. It can have the ability to create large scale employment opportunities. So therefore, we should focus on building a strong industrial base, because that can create gainful employment opportunities for India's youth. However, post 1991, so we have started the LPG reforms post 1991. However, the LPG reforms post 1991 have resulted in certain pockets of prosperity. But there are some core issues such as informal employment has increased, because 90% of the total employment that you know India in India, 90% of the total workforce has been engaged in the informal sector, and there is a significantly high level of unemployment existing, and the agrarian distress is another major problem. So therefore the core issues still existing, and these core issues have not been addressed yet. There is a need for the agricultural reforms, right? So there is a need for the agricultural reforms, and similarly there is a need to develop a strong industrial base for dealing with this problem of unemployment, right? So we need labor reforms. We need labor reforms to deal with this informal sector. There is a need to promote entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship can also create large scale employment opportunities. However, India continues to face certain inefficiencies in areas like governance, public service delivery, and state capacity. So all these factors have been hampering the sustainable and equitable growth, which is very important and necessary for India. So let's understand the socio-economic impacts of the limited growth model. So what are the socio-economic impacts of a limited growth model? Now what does this limited growth model? Now growth model which is centered around trade, particularly the external trade. So it could have certain socio-economic impacts. For example, trade and capital intensive growth. Capital intensive growth. So all these things failed to create a large scale employment opportunities or mass employment opportunities. Now this factor has led to the concentration of wealth in few hands in India, and there is also a rising rural urban divide. There is rising rural urban divide as well, right? So therefore the capital intensive growth plus trade, so it has led to the wealth concentration and rural urban divide rather than equitable sustainable growth rate, right? Similarly, important areas: education, healthcare, skill development, right? So these are the important areas that have to be focused on to achieve equitable and sustainable growth. So they are not keeping pace with the population needs, so thereby it has been limiting the upward mobility for large sections of India's population. So therefore we must focus on education, healthcare, skill development of our workforce. Now how can we reorient India's developmental path? It is also very important to reorient our development path. So in order to reorient it, we should invest in public health, education, nutrition, right? So they are very important to build a healthy, productive workforce which is capable of supporting the long-term growth in India. So this is the first factor that India should focus on if it wanted to become a developed country by the year 2047. And similarly, a focus should be on achieving institutional efficiency, decentralization rather than the top-down planning, and fiscal empowerment of state governments and the local self-governance institutions through the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. A very important. If government brings any social sector reforms, these social sector reforms must be implemented at the grassroots level with the help of the local self-governance institutions, envisioning people's participation. So therefore India must promote industrial deepening through targeted support to micro, small and medium enterprises. They can create gainful employment opportunities in India. Along with creating gainful employment opportunities, they also play a very important role to boost exports. Along with that, they can also substantially reduce the rural urban divide as well. This is also another major problem that India has been experiencing. And along with that, invest in green energy sectors, domestic research and development, innovation. And in fact, sustainable and well planned urbanization can become a driver of job creation and economic clustering, as seen in the global examples that we can see in China and East Asian economies. So therefore, the focus area should be healthcare, education, skill development, agri reforms, and recognizing the importance and potential of the urban local self-governance institutions, and India investing in an emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things. So these are the major areas that India can actually focus on to become a Vikasit Bharat by the year 2047, or a developed country by the year 2047. So the next important topic is the need for police reforms in India. The debate about the police reforms in India started after an incident of custodial death of Ajit Kumar in the state of Tamil Nadu. The person that you can see on this image, is Ajit Kumar from Tamil Nadu. So he was died because of the custodial torture. The context is that the custodial death of Ajit Kumar in Tamil Nadu in June 2025, so it has resulted in a renewed calls for police accountability as well as the anti-torture legislation in India. Remember, we don't have any anti-torture legislation in India, and in fact there is also an absence of mechanisms which ensures accountability of police to the general public. So therefore, there is a renewed call for police accountability and anti-torture legislation in India. Now let's understand the systematic nature of the custodial violence in India. Now, according to a 2023 Lok Sabha replay, 687 custodial deaths occurred between 2018-19 to 2022-23. And in fact, there are some states such as Maharashtra, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, they are topping the list, with Uttar Pradesh seeing 2630 cases and Maharashtra around 888 and Tamil Nadu 490, West Bengal 938. So in fact, many deaths are misreported as suicides or accidents. So thereby it has been masking the scale of abuse that has been taking place in the police custody. However, most of the victims of police brutality, police torture and custodial deaths are the marginalized groups. In fact, the custodial torture is disproportionately targeting the daily wage workers, Dalits, Adivasis and migrants, because they have no voice of their own. They don't know about this, and because of this reason, most of the victims are the marginalized groups. And therefore it has been reflecting the existing caste hierarchies and classes in, for example, if we talk about the state of Tamil Nadu, most of the victims are from the lower caste groups. So it has been reflecting an entrenched hierarchies of caste and class. And in fact, torture has also become not just a policing issue, but it is a manifestation of structural injustice that has been taking place against the marginalized groups. And in fact, around 90% of the police force comprising constables, but there is a lack of adequate training. There is no training on the professional conduct, and police forces are also insensitive towards the people who have been accused of various cases or under trials. So therefore, there has been a rising incidence of the custodial torture, custodial violence and even custodial deaths in several states as well. And in fact, it is being coupled with the institutional apathy which has been existing. They are very insensitive towards the people, particularly those people who are from the marginalized sections of the society. And there is also a pressure on the police forces, particularly at the lower level of the hierarchy, for the swift results and disciplinary action. So all these factors have been the major factors which are responsible for the custodial violence which has been taking place in India. So let's understand the legal and institutional deficit which has been existing. The Supreme Court in K. Basu versus the State of West Bengal case 1996. So it has laid down the procedural safeguards, and in Puttaswamy judgment of 2017 also it has upheld the right to bodily autonomy. Yet the compliance remains weak. So therefore, whatever guidelines that the Supreme Court has issued in both K. Basu versus State of West Bengal and K.S. Puttaswamy judgment, the police in all different states must follow these safeguards and guidelines. And in fact, the Law Commission in its 273rd report in 2017 has also recommended anti-torture law in India. This anti-torture law would deal with the custodial torture, custodial violence, and incidents of the custodial death as well. However, there is no such legislation that has been enacted so far, and in fact India is also not ratified the United Nations Convention Against Torture. In the year 2025, India was ranked as a high-risk country in the Global Torture Index as well. So therefore, all these things have been indicating there is a high prevalence of the custodial violence in India. There is a need for an anti-torture law, and India can also ratify the United Nations Convention Against the Torture, and that provides certain guidelines for India to frame its own domestic policy or legislation. However, India very often claims that it is one of the greatest mature democracy. So therefore, mature democracy must ensure that policing upholds the constitutional values. However, the use of Sherlock Holmes-like evidence-based methods must replace dirty Harry-style brutality rooted in impunity and secrecy that has been promoting the police violence and police brutality, and very often leading to the custodial deaths as well. India must put an end to the custodial violence, and there should be a fair treatment of the under trials. So for that, India must brought an anti-torture law to protect the under trials and also prevent the police brutality. And there is also a need for the police reforms as well. Right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.